Hey folks, over the weekend I was on Fox News, and as I promise you, I sometimes do post clips of my appearances because some of you don't have cable, some of you are not able to watch it, or you missed it, or whatever it is. So to help you out, I'm just going to play this for you guys. Feel free to leave your comments in the section down below, and I'll talk to you real soon here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Let's bring in constitutional attorney Mark Smith. Mark, thank you so much for being here. This story just keeps on going and going. Let's bring up this snippet from this Axios report that says that there were people within the Biden administration who had major concerns about this. Quote, an email from Biden's chief of staff, Jeff Zients, at 10:31 p.m. the night of January 19th, less than 14 hours before Biden was to leave office, confirmed the use of the presidential Autopen for those pardons. I approve the use of the Autopen for the execution of all of the following pardons. Thanks, Jay-Z. That was an email from Biden's chief of staff. What do you make of this latest Axios report, Mark?
Brian, I think the big picture here is this is very good news politically and legally for President Donald Trump. As you know, there are a series of these Supreme Court cases over the power of the president to control Article 2, the executive branch. And historically, in the last several decades, Brian, as you know, the deep state, these unelected bureaucrats have been running amok, controlling the executive branch and running the government in many respects. And this is just a more recent example and a very good example to highlight the problems with an unelected people run the Autopen, run the White House, and so on. And I think all this is going to be very good in terms of atmospherics to helping Donald Trump continue to win these cases before the Supreme Court. Because the one thing Donald Trump is doing very, very well is reminding people that as the president of the United States, all of the executive powers in Article 2 of the Constitution is vested in him as the president, the one person that's elected by all the people, voted on by all Americans. And I think this is very helpful in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, which is why Donald Trump keeps winning before the Supreme Court these questions of executive power and his authority.
Well, atmospherics and politics aside, what about legally by the law? Is there any sense here that these more historic, a record number, 4,250 pardons and clemencies that were signed with this Autopen, do they get thrown out the door?
Well, at a very high level, certainly a president is allowed to use an Autopen or an electronic signature. I mean, people use electronic signatures to sign contracts every day in American life, and that is legally fine. But this all assumes, Brian, that the person who is doing this, is signing off on this, is actually approved the use of, in this case, the Autopen. And that really gets into, did Joe Biden actually approve these pardons using the Autopen or not? And I think the only way to know whether or not this is true would be if somebody comes forward from the Biden administration and says, you know what, he really didn't know what was going on. These pardons were being issued with an Autopen by people that lack the authority from the president to do so. And it's going to be very difficult to get those inside facts, I suspect, but the Oversight Committee is certainly working on trying to get to the bottom of this. But the question is, did Joe Biden as president really authorize these or not? That's the factual question that's key.
The president says he knows exactly what he signed. That has been his position. What makes this story important is that you see pushback from within the administration, emails that show a confusion about the use of the Autopen and wondering and questions about why it's being used. And so that's why this story is important. Also, the issue of pardons and clemency that really stuck out at me was that there was real DOJ officials had no idea about who was getting these clemencies. In fact, some of these people, DOJ said, were murderers. They were not nonviolent folks, as the president said that they were. And that really stuck out to me. Let's play this from Lydia Moynihan, who talked about this, one of the contributors here at Fox.
You're talking about almost 4,500 pardons that were issued. And to some of them, it was murderers, it was violent criminals, it was people with violent drug histories. They weren't vetting any of those folks who were being pardoned. Again, that raises concerns about who these people are, whether they deserve to be free. And so I think we need answers about who was released, why they were released, and who ultimately is responsible for it.
Mark, your reaction?
Well, look, the Department of Justice works for the President of the United States. They're not an independent branch of government. So at the end of the day, whether or not the Department of Justice is directly involved or not with the pardon process, really doesn't matter. If the president wants to give someone a pardon or grant clemency, he has the authority to do so, which goes back to, did Joe Biden really sign off on this or not? Now, usually the Department of Justice is involved. They put together the paperwork. They put together the documents for the president to sign. But the fact that they didn't do it, arguably, doesn't change the legal nature of this. At the end of the day, did Joe Biden sign off on these or not? He is allowed to pardon hundreds, if not thousands of people. He has that legal authority under the Constitution itself. But that's a separate question from whether or not he really did it, really intended this, and signed on with this. And of course, that's what the Oversight Committee is trying to get to the bottom of. Did Joe Biden know what he was doing, and did he approve these pardons or not? The presumption is they're lawful, but that doesn't mean that presumption cannot be overcome, of course.
And as you said, this was done in a process that was not normal. DOJ did not go through these pardons and these clemencies the way that they normally do. And on top of that, this all was happening at a time where there was intense political pressure on the president for pardoning his son, Hunter Biden.